Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf tet. This is the daf for the first day of Rosh Hashanah. We're going to get started from wishing everyone Chag Sameach, Shana Tova. We're going to get started from a review of the end of yesterday's daf. We started with Avud Shmuel, and he basically was trying to bring a source for how do we know that if we have a Korban Pesach that was sacrificed Shelo Lishma, it was sacrificed not in the time that you're supposed to do it, not Bismana, not the right time, and l'shem korban acher, in the name of some other korban. It doesn't matter what korban is going to be a shlamim. Where do we get this from? We get this from this pasuk, ve'im enatzon korbano lezevach shlamim laHashem, which really is talking about if you're going to bring a korban shlamim, a peace offering, then, and you bring it from tzon, and then the pasuk is going to continue and say the next pasukim are, if you bring kesef, which is a sheep, or if you bring an aiz, a goat, this is what you do. But what the drasha is that this isn't talking at all about a shlamim. It's talking about im and tzon is a reference to Pesach, which is brought only from tzon, from sheep or lambs or goats. So minatzon is coming to teach you actually about a korban Pesach. And then it says it is brought as a shlamim. And then we say, that's how we learn it. So then we had a whole back and forth. How exactly do we learn it? And they had some difficulties. Then we get back to the end of the we thought it was a klal of prat. Then they said, no, really, it's from the word zevach. Zevach is liribuya. Zevach is an extra word there. You don't need the word zevach. Obviously, shamim is a zevach. That really means a sacrifice, right? So because it has that extra word, it's to teach you that this includes this additional case of, right, that it's that the imnatzon is the Pesach, the zevach is to teach you it's brought as a shlamim, which then the Gemara says, but that doesn't really help you because ema lechol deshachit leila havi kapateh. Again, if you're using it for this general word zevach, then if you did it as an ola, it should be an ola. If you did it as an asham, it should be an asham. So that doesn't really work. To which Amar Rabbi Avin, we're going to have two answers to this question. No. It's going to be brought as a zevach, and the zevach is clearly a shlamim. Why is that? Either. Now, we're going to start with Rabbi Avin, then we're going to have to correct a little bit what he said, fine-tune it. Something we're going to do a lot in today's daf. Dochim kodashim anechalim etzel kodashim anechalim. Ve'ein dochim kodashim anechalim etzel kodashim she'inam nechalim. What does this mean? If we have to take something that was set to be a korban Pesach and now is not being used as a Pesach, we're going to switch it to something that's similar. Similar in what way? Well, Pesach is eaten by anybody. Already, now you have to be kind of registered, but still, theoretically, anyone can eat a Pesach. Just like the shlamim can be eaten by anybody. To which they say, but wait, now I maybe jumped the gun a little. Really, the way he said it was just, it's a korban that's eaten. So comes the Gemara and says, what do you mean it's a korban that's eaten? Also, chatat and asham are eaten. So, except who eats them? Only the Kohen. And that's what they're going to say in the end. So they fine-tune what he's saying. We're going to basically say a kodshim that was supposed to be eaten by, that could have been eaten by anybody, is now going to be turned into a kodshim that can be eaten by anybody. But we're not going to. But we're not going to take a korban that was originally designated for eating by everybody and then change it into something that's not eaten by everybody and only the Kohen. That's answer number one. That now got fine-tuned and now we have it right. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Avin Amal, sounds like it's his son, okay? Dochim kodshim kalim etzel kodshim kalim ve'ein dochim kodshim kalim etzel kodshim kodshim. It's a totally different type of sanctity. There's kodshim kalim, there's low level, and there's high level. We're not going to switch a low level to be a high level sanctity. If it was designated for a low level, it's going to stay low level, okay? And we're not going to set it to be a high level. Now we have difficulties. 4 difficulties on, 3 of them are on both the answers, and 1 of them is only on the second answer. You'll see as we get there. But they're going to bring 4 difficulties on this, which is Matkava Rav Yitzchak Rabbi Savro or Rabbi Savrin, Ema Shachatala Shemasir, they have a Masir. But wait, there's other things that are koshim kalim, and they're eaten by everybody. What is that? Masir behema, the 10th of your animals. You have to tithe. You have to bring them, sacrifice them in the temple, and then you can eat them, and anyone can eat them. So that would be a good example. You could say, let's say they took the Pesach. They did it in the name of Maasir. Wouldn't that work as Maasir? Now, in each of these suggestions, they're going to suggest as difficulties, because we said they're all shlamim. They're not Maasir. We're going to have to say, what does it matter? Because the shlamim, in a sense, all these korbanot are really brought in the same way as shlamim, although we're going to see there's minor differences. So that's going to be the question before we get to the answer. In other words, we start with the difficulty, Then a question of lemay hilchata, what's the relevance? We're going to answer that. And then we're going to say why it's not going to be maser. Okay? And then we're going to do the same thing for bechor, for tmura, and for toda. Okay? We'll do the same for all four. So what's the nafkamina? What's the relevance halachically if we call it a maser or we call it a shlamim? Deloli by nisachim. Number one, there's nisachim, there's libations that go with every korban shlamim. So if we bring the Pesach as a shlamim, we're going to have to bring the libations. If we bring it as a maser, we won't need to. And number two, lemilka alei below yigael. By maser, it says, okay, there's a pasuk that says in Vayikra, forgot to write where it is. No, 1 second. In Vayikra, here it is. Kav zayin kav gimel. In Maaser it says, "V'hayahu tmurato yeh kodesh." Okay, we're going to get to tmura soon. If you substitute the 10th animal, you substitute a different animal, and instead both will be sanctified. That's the laws of tmura. You're not allowed to do that, but if you do, it will be sanctified. Lo yigael, and this animal can't be redeemed. Okay, there's an issue to redeem it. The rabbis will say you can't sell it. Okay, and you can't redeem the animal, the master animal. So what do we learn here? You'll get lashes if you redeem it. So that would be another relevance. If someone were to redeem this animal, right, they slaughtered it on any random day of the year, not Pesach, and in the name of Maaser, if it's Maaser and not Shlamim, so you'll have a lo taseh if you redeem that animal or sold it. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Ha'asiri kodesh. Why will it not be Maaser? Because it says, what is Maaser? The 10th animal. Ze Maaser ve'enacher Maaser. Only the 10th animal can be Maaser. You can't use any other animal to be Maaser. That doesn't work. Second difficulty. Maybe if you do it for the name of, in the sake of a firstborn animal, it'll be a firstborn animal. Now, what's strange about these questions, and really there's a different way to answer them, which is, and that's kind of the way they answer it, which is only the 10th animal can be the 10th animal. You can't create matzah out of nothing. Only the firstborn can be a firstborn. You can't create a firstborn sacrifice out of nothing. But Gemara is suggesting anyway, maybe it would have the status of a bechor, that the rules of bechor would apply. If you take this, right, what's a bechor? Firstborn animal, you have to give it to the Kohen. The Kohen has to sacrifice it and only then can eat the meat, and the meat's only eaten to the Kohen. So this, by the way, is not a difficulty on the first answer, because the first answer is it has to be food that's eaten by everybody, and this isn't eaten by everybody. But bechor is kodshim kalim. It's lower level sanctity. So it's a difficulty on the second opinion. So now, what would be lamai hilchata? What would be the relevance if we call it bechor? Again, loli bayin is sachim. There would be known as sachim that come with the bechor korban. If it's shlamim, yes. Inami deleit v'lekohanim. And the meat would obviously only go to the kohanim if it's bechor. Won't be eaten by the owner or by anybody else. Okay, but what's the answer? Why can't it be bechor? Well, this we learned from Maaser, from Gzera Shava. Bechor nami avara mi Maaser gamar. You can look at Rashi. Rashi says, what are the psukim here? It says by bechor ha'avarta kol peter rechem, and Maaser it says kol asher ya'avor tachat hashevet. Both have the root aval. Therefore, we learn Gzera Shava from one to the other, since Maaser can only be the one designated as Maaser, bechor can only be the one who's born as a firstborn. And therefore, you can't make a maaser or bechor just by saying, I'm slaughtering it for the sake of being maaser or being bechor. Ve'ema, third question, shachta l'shem tmura. This is a bit of an absurd one. Tmura is when I take my animal and I say, instead of this animal, I want a different one. But if I take my korban Pesach, and now, in the end, I just want to go back. If I swapped animals, now I can't do that. But both are sanctified and both have to be sacrificed. So in the end, one gets sacrificed as the original korban, and one gets sacrificed, the extra one, the substituted one, the one I substituted in place of the first one, that one is brought as a tmura sacrifice. So what if I took that Pesach, that I designated as korban Pesach, and I say I'm sacrificing it as if it was a tmura? Seems ridiculous because tmura is only substitution. You're calling it a substitution when it's not. But okay, you call it that. So maybe it should have the laws of tmura. Now, what would be relevance of that? Lamai hilchata. Number one, you get lashes because you're not allowed to make a tmura, and by basically saying I'm slaughtering this the same tmura you're doing tmura. And that seems to go back to the pasuk, even though it doesn't say lo yimacher. There's a bit of a problem with the pasuk, but probably it's just meant to be lo yigael. It can't be redeemed. And this is in that pasuk by Maaser that we saw, where it said basically, right, hu tmurato yeh kodesh, and it also said lo yigael. Lo yigael will be applicable to tmura as well. And therefore, okay, that would be the relevance. So why can't it be tmura? Because Amar Sutra, Bered Rav Nachman, same kind of idea as the previous two. or really from the Maaser, and then the Maaser, the Brachor is just learned from the Maaser, but the same kind of thing. We have a unique pasuk that says, Amar Krab v'haya hu tmurato. That means, right, specifically it and its tmura. Zo tmura v'en acher tmura. This is the only way to make tmura, by substituting. This wasn't a substitution. You can't just say, I'm sacrificing it in the name of tmura, and it'll be a tmura. Okay, fourth question. This one's going to be a little bit different, where the response, the answer in the end is going to be different. You'll see. It's not going to be from a drasha in the pasuk. Ema shachte l'shem todah. Maybe it could be a Thanksgiving offering. Lehavi ki todah, right? If you say, I'm slaughtering this korban Pesach in the name of a todah, this one has the most promise, because this could really be, if anyone decides to bring a Thanksgiving offering. So you're saying, I'm bringing this Thanksgiving offering, which is a type of shlamim. So that maybe theoretically would work. It would be a todah. Lamai hilchata, for what would be the relevance? L'hatino lechem, you would need to bring, there's 40 loaves of bread that you bring. Some are matzah breads, unleavened, and some are actually leavened bread. It seems ironic that korban Pesach would now be brought with chametz, but that's not the issue. So now, then we would have to bring it with these 40 loaves of bread. If it was really a todah. If it's a shlamim, we obviously don't. So now the Gemara rejects this and says, Mi kamidi de Pesach gufe lo bai lechem umotaro bai lechem. And from here on, the Sugi is going to call this Pesach a motar. What's a motar? It's an extra, like a leftover. Okay, and that kind of assumes, although we're going to see it's not the only case of this, but that the Pesach was leftover. It was past Pesach, and now it can't be brought anymore, because we're going to see this inside soon. But korban Pesach has to be brought from the animals within its first year. So if it's leftover from this year, we can't bring it the next year. And it's also, what was I going to say? Okay, I forgot. We'll get to the other one. Oh, right, it's male. That's something that's relevant for later. But if it's left over and then you can't use it for next year, so what do you do with it? It becomes a shlamim, basically, right? That's what we're talking about. That's our case for the most part. I mean, you theoretically could have done this before Pesach also and done it shalom lishma, but usually it's when it's done after. So now they're just calling it a motar. What's a motar? It's a leftover. It's a sacrifice that can't be used for what it was designated for whatever reason. So now they're going to say the following. It can't be mikamidi. There can't be something that to Pesach gufe lo ba'alechem. If you brought it as a korban Pesach, it wouldn't need all those breads. And motaro ba'alechem, and now you're going to say, well, what's left over needs bread? That makes no sense. You're not going to make the motar have to do more things than the original. To which the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Of course you can. Ihachi, that's, and again, we're going to have to reread. Today's all about rereading what people said. We're going to reread that line in a minute because of the difficulty. Remember, we kept saying, if you bring it as a shlamim, you have to bring all these libations with it. So the original Pesach doesn't need libations, but the motar does. So what's the problem to say it needs 40 loaves of bread? So now they say, fine. This is what we really meant to say, fixing it. Mi kamidi de motar toda atzma lo ba'alechem, v'ilu motar da'atile me'alma ba'alechem. The motor of a toda doesn't even need bread. What's the motor of a toda? Let's say I separate an animal for a korban toda, and then I lose the animal. Gemara talks about these scenarios all the time, where animals get lost, they wander, right? And we get lost. You bring another animal in its stead, because I promised I would bring a toda, so now I bring a different animal, and then I find the original animal. Now, at this point, I've given my sacrifice. I've done what I was supposed to do. So what do? Well, the original one was sanctified as well. I have to bring it, sacrifice it, but I don't bring the bread with it. So if the leftover toda itself doesn't need bread, then motar, the da'atilu by alma, then this motar that I created, right? I basically took this Pesach and I said it's going to be a toda. That's going to need bread. That makes no sense. So that's why in the end, here we don't have a special pasuk that says only a korban toda can be a korban toda, like we did with the maser and the bechor and the tmura, but we have a different answer that it would be totally crazy to make it have bread. And then what they're basically doing is saying, since there's no relevance then there's zero relevance whether we call it a toda or a shlamim, because the rules are going to be the same. The toda also needs libations and it has the bread, but this toda wouldn't have breads anyway, so then there's no difference. We could call it a toda, we call it a shlamim, it's all one and the same. Okay, that resolved the four difficulties. Now, now we're going back and asking a different question on the original drasha. The original drasha was im minat tzon. If you bring it from the tzon, and we said tzon is a reference to the Pesach. So now they say im minat tzon. Okay, im minat tzon. They say. Here we have a question. Matzav la Rav Yemer Bereit Rav Hillel. Umimayte b'motar Pesach tiv. How do we know it's talking about motar Pesach? We said tzon. Pesach is brought from tzon. There's another korban brought from tzon. Dilma b'motar asham ktiv. Maybe it's talking about an asham that's done the wrong, an extra asham or something. And maybe it's not talking about this Pesach that was done shalol lishma. Then we can't learn our law at all because asham is brought from an ayil, a ram, which is a certain age of a sheep. So it's also in the sheep family, which is in the tzon family. So Amar Rava, Amar Kra, ve'im and atzon korbanot l'zevach shlamim. So look at the pasuk. It says from tzon. Now, davar hashaveh b'chol atzon has to be all tzon. Tzon includes sheep and lambs and goats. And you can't bring the asham from all of those. It's only the ram. So that's why it can't be asham. However, Matkevla Rav Avin Bar Chia v'Item Rav Avin Bar Kahana, not sure which one of them asked this question, Bechol atamal min lahotzi. We've learned this a million times. Every time we get to the word mem at the beginning of a word, or min, right? Mem is short for min. Me hatzon, min hatzon. It's always coming to limit, saying not all tzon. So you just said it's all tzon, but the word min is limiting. Become min l'rabot, and here you're using min to say everything. So Amar Rav Mani, no. Hacha, notice the name is Mani, the same as min. Hachanami min lahotzi. This is what I said before. Min is coming to limit. It's actually, you can't bring the Pesach from old tzon. It's limited by age, can't be in its second year, and it's limited in feminine. It can't be a female. Okay, it's limited to males. So it is limited. It's not old tzon, but the word hot tzon is a word that includes sheep and lambs and goats. So that we have to take literally. So from tzon, you're going to learn all the types, and that excludes the asham, and therefore it's time about Pesach, even though the mem limits to which kind of tzon you can use, right? Which age and sex. Matkefla Rav Chana Bagdad. Now we have another question. Now this is going back to the original drasha again. We just asked about the asham. Now we have another question on. Wait, why are you assuming it's time about a motar Pesach? The Hami Dichtiv, now here, instead of saying maybe it's time about something else, it's going to say it doesn't make sense it's time about Pesach from the context. I mentioned before that it says if you're going to bring it from the tzon, the next pasuk is if you're going to bring it from the kesef, and if you're going to bring it from an eitz, right? If you're going to bring it from a sheep, or if you're going to bring it from a goat. Basically saying these are the different types you can bring. But right, so Hami Dichtiv in kesevim is michlal delav motar Pesach. It sounds like they're not talking about the motar Pesach. Why? Because we already know from Sukkim that the Pesach is brought from the kvasim u'minayizim. There's a pasuk that tells you exactly, bring it from the kvasim, bring it from the yizim. So we don't need this pasuk to tell you can bring it from kvasim, you can bring it from yizim. We already know that from Shmot. So what's the in kesevim is coming to teach us? To which they say, it's coming to teach us something else. It's needed for the following bright. Kesev, it says keves, it should be kesev. Keves and kesev are the same thing, but the Torah sometimes calls it kesev. The first drasha we're going to have is the word kesef comes to say that it's got that you're going to have to burn the fatty tail of the Pesach. Also, just like you burn it with the shlamim, you have to burn the fatty tail of the sheep. There's a unique law that gets burned specifically of the sheep. That fatty tail gets burned on the altar. Okay, with the parts that get burned. Remember, the shlamim gets mostly eaten by the owners, but that part has to be burned. And that's also the Pesach has to be burned. That's the first thing we learn. Kishu Omer im kesef. Then they add the words if kesef. What is that im add? L'rabot Pesach she'ibrash nata, which is actually our case. It's to include a Pesach that the year passed for the animal. Basically, it's too old, can't be brought anymore. So that's going to be a motar, and that you're going to bring as a shlamim. And shlamim ab'im achmat Pesach. And all the korbanot shlamim that you bring, they will bring extra chagigot on the 14th also, to eat them at night with the Korban Pesach. In case people didn't have enough to eat a kazayit of the Korban Pesach, they would add extra meat, or they wouldn't be full, they would add extra meat to eat. I think you have to eat a kazayit of the Pesach, but you can eat other meat as well. Now I can't remember exactly, but we learned all that in Pesachim, the details. But anyway, all those shlamim, the kamach ma Pesach, lechol mitzvot shlamim. All the mitzvahs of shlamim are applicable to all those korbanot that you bring. Pshiyit anu. What are the rules? That you need smicha, nisachim, the libations, nufach chazer v'shok, you wave the chazer and the shok, the chest and the thighs of the animal. That's what we learned from that pasuk. And is, what about im is? כשהוא אומר עם עז, הפסיק העניין. לימד על עז שאין התונה על יה. Im is is to say, well, what we said about that isn't true about this one, because if it's an is, then you don't burn the tail. That's what we need. That's what we needed, though, the in kesef im is for. So you still could be saying it's time about Pesach. We've resolved the difficulty and just say that in kesef is were needed for something else. But now you might have noticed we now have another drasha for how we know about the Pesach that passed its time and that you're now doing it shalom lishma, that it's coming to be a shlamim from this pasuk. In kesef, we just said it. So the Gemara asks, is it learned from here in Kesef? Midavua deshmol nafka. Avua deshmol learned it from the other pasuk. Im in its own, right? Zevach shlamim. Okay, we learned it from there. So now we have two pasukim teaching the same thing. And they're going to even say that there's a third pasuk. Okay, and that's where they're going to go now. So Amar Avua deshmol im in its own korbanol zevach shlamim. That's the pasuk of it. Shmuel says. And right, Davar Abam in its own yeh zevach shlamim. That's what we said. It's about Pesach. And that Avar's Mano. And Akante, here's the third one. Rav Nachman Amar Rav Ravua Nafka. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav Ravua Minayim Lemotar Pesach Shekarev Shlamim. Exactly our case. How do you know if it's left over from Pesach? You sacrifice it as a Shlamim. Shneimel v'zabachta Pesach la'Hashem Elokecha sonu bakar. This is a very strange pasuk. It's in Sefer Dvarim. It says, "Bring your korban Pesach to God, son and bakar." Now bakar are cattle. You don't bring a korban Pesach from cattle. So what could this possibly mean? Hello, ain't Pesach ba? It comes from the sheep and the goats. Ela mikan lemotar Pesach shehei ledavar haba min hatzon umin habakar umani ushlamim. This is telling you that a Pesach theoretically could be sacrificed as a korban, a type of korban that can also be brought from bakar. You can't bring Pesach from bakar, but it could be like a shlamim, which could be brought. The shlamim, the peace offering, can be brought from any kind of animal. Any kind of animal that's kosher to bring on the altar, but it could be brought from any kind of animal. So, right, from the bakar, from the tzon, and that's your another pasuk which teaches you a Pesach could be brought as a shlamim. So now we have three pasukim teach you the same thing. So that doesn't make any sense. To which the Gemara says, right, elatzvata kraitiva. There's three pasukim. We're turning now to Amabet. Here we're going to tell you what the three pasukim all come to teach. Chad liibraz manovi ibrashnato. One is for an animal that passed its time, where the age is too old, aged out. And also, sorry, that's ibrashnato. Ibraz mano is the time for Pesach passed. It's past the 14th of Nisan. You can't sacrifice it anymore as a Pesach. And it's now too old. So even if you wanted to sacrifice it, you wouldn't be able to. One is it passed the date, but it didn't pass its year. Okay, it's basically still within its first year. And the third is where it hasn't passed its time, its date, or its age. So it's basically still before Pesach and it's still within the age limit. So then theoretically it could be brought as a Pesach, but if you sacrifice it, l'shem, some other korban, it's going to be brought as a shlam. And that's what each of the three psukim are teaching you. Now they're going to explain why you need all these three psukim. With tzrichi, you need them all because the ikat avrachman achad hava mina hechad yibrashnato uzmano. The eichami Pesach legamri. You might have thought it's brought as a different korban and it could be kosher to be a different korban because this no way can be used for Pesach in any way, shape, or form. Both it passed the date and it passed its age. Aval ibraz mano v'lo shnato dechaze the Pesach sheni. But let's say you're at the 20th of Nisan, and now it passed the date, but it's still of age, and theoretically you could bring it as Pesach sheni in the 14th of Iyar. Maybe you think emalo. Maybe you think, well, now if you did it for some other thing, you disqualified a good, valid korban. It could have been brought as a makeup korban Pesach, and maybe it's not. Maybe it can't really be brought as a shlamim, and if you do, it's a disqualified korban. And the answer is no. You might have thought that, but that's why we need the second pasuk. And now you can see where this is going because ikat avrachman hani tarte. If they had those two, you'd say mishum de'itchele mimotzayu. Look, still they both missed their main date of Yudalad Nisan. But if it's not even Pesach yet, and it's still of age, and you could theoretically have brought it on Pesach, and you brought it too early, maybe we won't accept it as a shlamim. Maybe you really will be disqualified. But no, still we're going to say it counts as a korban shlamim, and that's why tzricha, that's why you needed all three psukim. So that's the first section of today's daf, a long section, which was all in the end is kind of interesting because if you look at it from a different perspective, what we did was we went through this drasha and had all these questions on the drasha and how does the drasha work until we fine-tune things and resolve difficulties. But in the end, resolving some other difficulty, we then brought up this other source and in the end said, by the way, looking backwards, if we look at this sugya from a different perspective, we now say there's 3 psukim that teach us this law, and it's to teach us each of those 3 things that we just said. Now we're going to go to the second part of today's sugya, and that's Rav who says something in the name of Mavog. Now, just to give you the structure, what we're going to do, we're going to have a difficulty with the first reading. We're going to have to change, edit it again, like I said, and edit it a second time. So we're going to have 3 versions of what Rav says in the first version of what Rav said. Then we're going to bring someone who said that Rav said something completely different, okay? Or very similar, but very different, okay? So, I'm a Rav Mishmei de Mavog, okay? We don't know who Mavog is, or at least I don't know. I didn't look him up, whether he appears elsewhere, but it seems like a strange name. But Rav, we know, we're very familiar with Rav. Rav says something in the name of Mavog. And now we're moving topics off of Pesach. We're talking about a chatat, sheshachata l'shum chatat nachsham. You separate, you designate a korban sin offering for a sin you did. But then when it's slaughtered in the name of a chatat nachshon. What's chatat nachshon? Nachshon was one of the Nisiim. If you remember in Parshat Naso, whole long list of all the korbanot and the things that the Nisiim brought in the Chanukah Mishkan. And one of them is they bring us a chatat. So now this is a different chatat. It's not a sin offering, okay? There's a few chatats, there are exceptions to the rule. They're not sin offerings. So if you bring a chatat in the name and it's slaughtered by the person who slaughters it in the name of chatat nachshon, which is not given for atonement, it's kshera. Why? It says this is the rules for chatat. It teaches you there's one rule for all chataot, meaning it's not a chatat shalom lishma. It's actually a chatat. It was on l'shem chatat. Who cares if it's a different kind of chatat? They're all one and the same. But we're going to have difficulty with this drasha because Yativ Rava v'Karmel ala hashmata. Now Rava was teaching this. Rav Masharshia comes and asks Rava the following question. He says, I have a difficulty from this source. If you really take literally, Zot Torah chatat means all chatats have the same rules for them. And if you do with the wrong intent, it'll all work fine. Then the same should be said for mincha. Now it happens the same is said for mincha in terms of law, but for a different reason. And because we're going to have a different reason, we're going to say, why don't we just say, or say a little differently, but sounds like that's the reason. If you didn't have that reason, you wouldn't be able to say Zot Torah mincha, even though there's a pasuk that says that, and say, oh, it's the same rules for all menachot. You could do it l'shem, a different one, and it'll be kosher no matter what. But they actually learned that, but from a totally different reason. And that's going to say this Zot Torah chatat drasha doesn't really work because it doesn't work for the mincha one. So we'll read it all inside, and then you'll get it. So Rabbi Shasha says to Rava, look at the source. Rabbi Shimon Omer, if you do the kmitza, that's the part where you have the dough of the meal offering. The kohen puts his 3 fingers in, takes out a small part of it. That's the part that gets burned on the altar. So when the kohen does that, if he did it shelo lishma, they're kshirim v'alu l'balin l'shem chova. So now we're going to say if you did that mincha offering for the wrong type of mincha, not the one the owner was intending to bring, it's fine. It works completely. Why? They're not like sacrifices. What does that mean? In what way are they different from sacrifice? Sacrifices, it won't work. But this actually not only is it kosher, but it works to fulfill the obligation of the owner. If you bring a marcheshet and you do a machvat l'shem marcheshet. Now these are 2 different types of pans. One is deeper than the other. One comes out softer, one comes out harder. Now, because if you bring it with the wrong intent, but then you go ahead and do it the right way, so we're going to say, ma'aseh mochichim. Your actions prove that you obviously meant, and you just in your head had the wrong thing for the moment, but you actually meant to do the right thing because you did the right thing a minute later when you prepared it. And if you do, I'm sorry, I'm just lost the place. Right, ma'aseh mochichim ala shehi machvat. Right, so your actions after prove that you meant for it to be a machvat, not a marcheshet, even though you said marcheshet when you did the kmitza. And chariva l'shem blulav, a dry one instead of a liquidy one, which is one has oil in it and some don't have oil in it. So if you meant to do one without oil, you said you were you were meant to do without oil, and you did it without oil, and then you said you were doing it l'shem blulav when you did the kmitza for one with oil. Again, You already proved by preparing it without the oil that you weren't planning to do it with oil. So therefore, that works. What's the comparison by Zevachim? About Zevachim, okay, all the actions of the korban, the main actions, you do in the exact same way. Shchita achad lekulam, there's only one way to slaughter them. Kabbalah achad lekulam, zricha achad lekulam, right? You do, or maybe you add the words halacha lefi kulam, right? All the four avodot are the exact same thing. The slaughtering, the catching the blood, the walking the blood, and the zrika on the altar. Now the zrika is sometimes a little different, but still there's zrika achad lekulam. They all have blood sprinkled. So it's clear that you meant to do it's not clear in a korban which one you meant. And that's why your machshava is important. Where your machshava will be disproven by your actions, then it's clear that you meant it and therefore it works. Now, here comes the difficulty. Tama d'maaseh mochichim, ha'emaaseh mochichim lo, right? Sounds like only because your actions prove it. If it weren't for that, it wouldn't work. But amai. Lema zot Torah mincha, Torah achad l'chol menachot, just like it says zot Torah l'chatan. It says zot Torah mincha, it should be the same rule for all menachot. Why not? So that can't be the drasha. Okay, so we're going to modify. The first modification of Rav. And this is what Rav said. This must be what he said. Amar Rav Mishmei de Mavok. He said in the name of Mavok. Chatat shachata. Now, I just want to point out that first thing was putting it in the realm of what we call shinoi kodshim. Right? You switched a chatat for a different chatat. But since it was within the same realm of chatat, it works. So we thought, then we just didn't like the drasha, so we're going to have to readapt it. And now it's going to actually be talking about shinoi balim. We're now going to change it. That it's that you did it for the wrong person. Okay? So we're going to see how he changes it. Amar Rav Mishmei de Mavok. Chatat sheshachata al menat sheitkaper ba nachshon. You slaughter it so that Nachshon will get kapara for you. And that's a little bit weird. Nachshon is dead, right? We're living after the time of Nachshon, obviously. Kshera, why? Because it ain't kapara l'metim. You obviously didn't mean there's no shinoi balim when the balim don't exist, when they're dead. Okay, so then they say, but wait, why did they specifically, why did Rav, or Mavog, who he's saying in the name of, specifically talk about Nachshon? Why don't you just say V'lema meit ba'alma? Just say any dead person. So Hakamashlan, well, he wanted to teach you something additional. Tama de meit. It's only because the person was dead, and that's why it's not considered shinoi balim. But ha de chai dumya de nachshon psula. But what if the person was alive, and you did it in the name of someone who was meant to bring a korban that's like nachshon, which is what? A chatat that's not a sin offering. So if when the Kohen slaughters that korban, he says, I'm doing it in the name of the wrong person, and someone who's chayav a korban chatat for, we're going to see right now, what would that be? Ma'ininu, chatat nazir v'chatat mitzorah. The nazir brings as part of the purification process from the nazir, and the mitzorah is part of the purification process of the mitzorah. The nazir is the ending process of the nazir, and for the mitzorah, it's the purification. They bring a chatat. Now they didn't sin. It's not for a sin. It's a chatat. So now they say, why? Now what they're basically going to say is, that case it would be psula. Okay. So since, if the person was alive, but doing it in a different type, that wouldn't work. So now the Gemara says, why wouldn't it work, right? Because that's shinoi balim who are alive. Okay. So now they're going to say, hane olot ninhu. But wait, those should be fine. Why should they be fine? Because they're a korban olah. Because even though it's shinoi balim, but they're considered like a korban olah. What does that mean? Well, they're not brought for atonement. Now, when it's specifically, we talk about shinoi balim, we learned this on Daf Zayin, that it says that that it's because of this pasuk lechaper alav. It's to atone for you and not anyone else. If you do it in the name of someone else, it's ruined. But only if they're going to be atoning like you. But if they're not doing it for atonement, and it's not like you were supposed to do the atonement, then it's actually kshera. So now they say, right? So we thought that they were saying only nachshon, but not these guys, because these guys would be kshera. But now they say, why would it be? I'm sorry, these guys would be psula. And now they say, why would they be psula? They're actually, it's not shinoi balim. But if you have shinoi balim, it has to be, to disqualify it, has to be that they were doing it also for atonement. But if they were doing it for something else and not atonement, like the Matzorah or the Nazir, then it wouldn't be the case. Okay, so basically, this doesn't work. Okay, so now they say, Ika de Amar. Okay, I'm sorry. There's one, so that's a problem. So now we're gonna have the third reading of Rav before we get to the second girsa. If you're gonna say it, you're gonna say it like this. I'm a Rav Mishmei Mavog. Chatat shechata al shemechuyav chatat kinachshon kshera. Now we're gonna say the opposite of what we just said a minute ago. If it's anyone who's bringing a chatat like nachshon, meaning mitzora, nazir, any of those people, it's going to be kshera, because shinoi baalim is not disqualified if they're not getting atonement like you. Only if it's l'chaper alav on you and not on someone else who needs the same atonement like you or needs atonement like you. These people don't need atonement at all. They're bringing a chata for a different reason. And therefore, that will actually be a kosher korban because the psul, the disqualification of switching the owner is not relevant in this case. So now they say, right? So, and chatat nachshon, olahu, right? And that's because the chatat of nachshon is like a korban olah. Okay? Now, and it's not a shinoi baalim of a chatat for a chatat. But now we have an ikadamar who looks at this in a totally different perspective, like the flip. The other version of Rav is that Amar Rav Mishmei Mavog, chatat shechata l'shem chatat nachshon psula, the exact opposite of what we just said. If you slaughter it in the name of a chatat nachshon, it's psula. Now, not because of shinoi baalim, because we already said it's excluded from shinoi baalim based on what we learned about shinoi baalim on Tav Zayin. But they say the following. Why is that? Because we keep saying, well, it's an ola. It's not really a chatat, right? It's like an ola. But now they say, if it's an ola, then chatat nachshon ola. Then it's a korban ola. And then we go back to saying it's shino kachim. It's like bringing a chatat for the sake of an ola. That for sure doesn't work. We know that. Okay? So that's the second completely different reading of Rav. The lema chatat nazir chatat mitzvah. So now they say, but if that's what you wanted to teach, why would you say chatat l'shem nachshon? Why don't you just bring a more relevant one like a nazir or a mitzvah? Ikar chatat naka, because they wanted to bring the first chatat in history that was brought in this way, and that was the chatat of nachshon. Okay, so that was an easy question to resolve. Now, based on this sugya, we're now going to get to something else, which is Amar Rav. Really should be Rava. Most of the people correct the nosach. Amar Rava. What if I sinned with chelev and I was supposed to bring a chatat chelev, and instead, when they slaughtered it, they thought in their minds, "Oh, we're doing this because Michelle sinned with dam; she ate blood." Or l'shem chatat avodah zarah, or they said I was bringing a sin, right? They were slaughtering it for the purposes of avodah zarah, sin offering. Kshera, that works because chatat, they're really one and the same. Even though, right, you don't have to get it exactly right which sin you did. Right? You don't need that detail. L'shem chatat nazir, l'shem chatat mitzvah psula, because hanei olot ninu. Now you see why they're getting here, because if you did it for the purpose of a chatat mitzvah or a nazir, then it's disqualified because that's an olah. That's like bringing a chatat for an olah. That matches the second version of Rav. But now by Rava asks a follow-up question on what he just said. What if you switch not a chelev for dam, but a chelev for tumat mikdash, which is a korban olah v'yored? It's a sliding scale. So do we say mi amrinan karet kemota? Look, they're both chatat. They have to do with karet, right? If you did it intentionally, it would be karet. Unintentionally, chatat, same idea. Oh, dilma ben in kavua kemota. Or do we say no? It's not it's a sliding scale. It's not a set korban. The chatat of chelev is a set korban. You can't switch that with, right? If you switch it for the other one's different. It's a sliding scale. So maybe we don't know which one. Okay, we don't have an answer to this question, but what we do have now is a different version of what Rava said. Rav Acha b'rei de Rava matne kulu lepsul. He takes the ones in the first category and says actually they're all disqualified. Chelev for dam doesn't work. If you have for chelev and they slaughter it for the intent of blood, it doesn't work. My timer, because it says v'shachat ota lechatat, l'shem ota chatat. You have to slaughter it for a chatat, for that exact chatat. You have to have in mind the person who slaughters what sin offering it's going for. Okay, now it makes no sense, the question. The question has nothing to do with this version. Because in this version, already you can't switch chelev and dam. Of course, you can't switch chelev with a tumat mikdash for kodashav, which is a sliding scale offering. So they say, Amr le, ana b'shinoi baalim matnina, v'hachi matnina. According to me, this is all about shinoi baalim, and this goes back to what we were just talking about with Rav in the name of of what was his name? Forgot his name. Mavog. Okay. So now he says the following, and this is how and this is how you read it. I'm a Rav. This is my version of Rav. That's what he has, psul, right? Now we thought in the first version we had those three are ksherim, and the next category were psulim, which is if you try to do it in the name of the Chatat Nazir, Chatat Mitzorah, they're psulim. Why? According to the second version of Rav, in the name of Mavog, because it's an ola, and then it's like bring a Chatat l'shem ola, which is no good. But now, and then when they said all of them were pasulim, we assumed, well, the first one switched from kasher to pasul, and the next ones are pasul anyway. But now we're going to swap everything from the first version. And we're going to say that what we thought was kasher is pasul, and what we thought was pasul is kasher. So follow along with me. So the chaylev switching with dam or avodah zarah, no good. Because you need exactly the right one. Because remember, he said chatat. It said in the pasuk shachat ota lechatat. It has to be for the chatat that you did. Now the second part. Why is it kshera? Because that's shinoi ba'alim. And shinoi ba'alim, remember, if they're not getting atonement through it, then it's not actually a problem to switch it to somebody else. And because they're not actually olo, but they're like olo. And that's like the first version of Rav. And then, according to that, comes the question. Here comes the question. By Rav. Now, in order for it to be shinoi ba'alim is a problem. Now, here we're going to say it's not that you did the chelev for the same person thinking they did tumat mikdash v'kodashav. You did it in the name of someone else. Now, is that shinoi ba'alim? Is it the same? If it's the same, then yes, it's going to be a shinoi ba'alim and disqualified. If it's not the same, then it's actually a big shera. So again, now here comes the question the same way. Mia rina karet kamota, and this would come to the opposite conclusion. If it's the same, then it's disqualified. Delay kavua kamotat, where we say it's different because it's a sliding scale, and we're left with teku. No answer to this question. Okay, with either version, we have two versions and no answers. So today was a lot of different versions and different readings, fixed readings of what people said because it's hard to understand what they actually said. Okay, Itmar, and today's sugya with a machloka between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Shachata lishma lizrok damasha lo lishma. We're only going to start the sugya today. It really continues into tomorrow. It's a very basic machloka between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. It's totally different from what we're doing, although it's still lishma and lo lishma. You slaughtered it lishma, so you're good. You didn't slaughter it shelo lishma in this case. You slaughtered it for the name of the right reason. But while you're slaughtering it, you think in your head that you're going to lizrok damasha lo lishma. That when you do the sprinkling of blood, so I'm slaughtering it, let's say l'shem shlamim. And I think in my head that when I do the sprinkling of the blood, I'm going to do it. You're a Kohen, obviously, because you're going to do that also. Right? Shechita is kshera by everybody. But here we have a Kohen who's thinking, when I sprinkle the blood, which can only be done by a Kohen, I'm going to do it for the name of an Ola. Why you would do this, I have no idea. But if you were to do that, would it be disqualified or not? Rabbi Yochanan amar psula, Rish Lakish amar kshera. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan says no good. Rish Lakish says it's fine. Why? Rabbi Yochanan will understand their opinions more tomorrow, but we'll start today. Rabbi Yochanan amar psula, mechashvin me'avodah l'avodah. When you're in one action, your thoughts about the other actions are relevant. And where do we get that from? That's what pigul is. Pigul is the Kohen is slaughtering it, and while he's slaughtering it, he thinks, I'm going to sprinkle the blood tomorrow, which is forbidden, or I'm going to burn the stuff on the altar tomorrow. So from one action, if I think about another action, that's relevant. And we learn that from Pigul. So that's why it's forbidden, disqualified. Rish Lakish amar kshera. We don't learn from Pigul to here. Pigul is a totally separate thing. That has its own rules. This, lishma and lo lishma, has different rules. As long as I slaughtered it in the name of the right korban, I'm good. What I thought about sprinkling the blood in the name of a different korban, I didn't sprinkle the blood. My thoughts about the other avodah aren't relevant. And Pigul has its own laws. We don't learn from there to here. And then we're going to continue and understand this better. Here we're going to finish. So let's go and try to do a quick review. We started with, basically, again, if we review from a little bit of a different way than the flow, but we in the end have three sources for this thing that a Pesach shelo lishma. It's done. Now we learned lo lishma can be even before its time, after its time, once it can't be brought anymore because of the age, because of the Pesach past. All of those cases, if it's brought for the shame of any other sacrifice, we count it as a shlam. And that we went back and forth. Why? How did we know? Why not something else? And we excluded all the other possibilities. That we had questions and answers, and then we saw why we need 3 psukim to teach this, because of the 3 different types of cases that are included. Then we went to the case of this, what Rav said in the name of Mavog, all about this Chatat Nachshon. The Chatat Nachshon is like an Ola. Does that mean there's no problem of Shinoi Baalim because it's not the same atonement and therefore it's actually not disqualified? Or is it considered like an Ola completely, which means it's a total Shinoi Kodshim? You've switched it from something that's supposed to be a Chatat, you did it as an Ola, it's completely disqualified and doesn't work. So we had 2 approaches to viewing that. And from that, we got into what Rava said, 2 versions of what Rava said, and how it connected either to the second version of Rav or to the first version. And with that, we finished today. And then we ended with this Machlok of Rabbi Yochanan, which we'll get back to tomorrow. Wishing everyone a Shana Tova, K'tiva v'Chatima Tova, and tomorrow's daf will be up after this one.